What?
That's a frog. We're nature. Oh my goodness, okay. Hey everybody, this is Kaylee from Rewild. Welcome to our YouTube channel. Our first video on here will be about fertilizing. So fertilizing is usually something that once you have kind of mastered the types of plants that you like and that work really well for you in your space and your lifestyle, you've got watering down, you've got the light down. Fertilizer is a really great way to encourage really vigorous growth, or you can encourage blooming on specific plants. So it's really a level 2 type of concept. Big question, what is fertilizer? So fertilizer can actually be a lot of different things, but for the most part, conceptually, what we need to know is that is usually nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, in some kind of ratio of those 3 things. A good way to know what the ratio is it will be right on the bottle. So low ratio is going to be more organic fertilizers if those numbers are really small and pretty consistent. If they're ever really like skewed in one way or another, usually it's a specialty fertilizer that's encouraging root growth if there's potassium in there, or blossoming if there's phosphorus. So there's multiple different types of fertilizers. There's crystals, there's liquid, and then there's more systemic fertilizer like this guy. We in the store sell this liquid organic fertilizer that's in a very low ratio of all 3 nutrients. It's just really accessible and really easy to use, which is very, very important when you're first starting out fertilizing, because it can be very intimidating. It's very easy to do it wrong and mess it up and kind of not really know what went wrong, because you would think something that's essentially a multivitamin for your plant would be on the whole very positive, but we'll kind of walk through a few ways that it can kind of go wrong. Oh no! This is an all-purpose, organic, very gentle fertilizer. I personally use this on all of my plants, including my cactus and succulents. Again, I dilute a lot and I only fertilize every other week. But you can actually buy specialty fertilizers that's more attuned to different species. So buying a cactus and succulent specific fertilizer is worth it if you do have an extensive collection, especially if you have more mature plants. They'll really be able to utilize those nutrients a lot better than just with an organic all-purpose one. If you have blooming plants, you'll want to get a blooming specific fertilizer, especially through the spring or their specific blooming season. You can buy foliar sprays for air plants, and then of course orchids are a class all of their own, and they have their own fertilizers as well. Another fertilizer that we use here in the shop, but we don't really sell it, we just use it and sprinkle it into your repottings in the spring, is this is Foma Organic. It's actually granules, and it's made from a poultry byproduct. It's very stinky. But good fertilizer should be, so that's okay. So with this one, obviously you can just put it in water and kind of let it dilute and dissolve. But we just like to add, according to the instructions, always follow the instructions, a ratio into our potting mix, just so it's in the soil. And again, every time you're watering, as long as you're doing a deep and thorough watering, it's gonna allow those nutrients to kind of just be uptake by the plant and kind of just dissolve throughout the growing season instead of having to constantly fertilize. When you are ready to fertilize your plants, typically that'll be in the early spring to late fall. You can kind of use the equinoxes as your guide, but really you can fertilize your plants anytime you're seeing new growth, even if that's through the winter. More power to you. But whenever you're fertilizing, you really want to dilute. I personally was very afraid of fertilizer for a very long time. I couldn't quite get it right. I had a couple mishaps, a couple deaths. So what I found is using a really easy to use, very water soluble liquid fertilizer that's organic, so it has those really low ratios, and diluting it a lot, like even more than the instructions on the bottle say, is just a really accessible way to use fertilizer to really make the plants happy, to really see vigorous new growth, and to not mess it up. So I'm going to show you how I fertilize and how I prefer to use fertilizer with my plants, which is basically just watering it in and kind of making it inclusive to your watering cycle so it doesn't have to be another step in your regimen. So I actually just like to use this cap as like my measuring, and then typically when I water, I have a watering can at home that's about 16 or 20 ounces, so this base is approximately that much. And this is actually a concentrate, so this big bottle would last you a really long time because it's made to dilute. So we're just gonna pour it in. It's a really fun color and consistency. This one in particular is made from bat guano. Google that. Bat guano, like what? All right, so we have this really beautiful watermelon peperomia here. It's starting to put out some really cute new growth. And then we're just gonna water it. And that's it. So I'll probably water this plant on a regimen of every other week, 10 to 14 days. I actually like to alternate my fertilizing. So I will do one watering, and then I will do a fertilizing, and then I'll do another watering. That also just helps all of the fertilizer get completely through the soil and make sure that it's not kind of sitting in any pockets and just not distributing evenly. If there is fertilizer that is kind of like getting stuck in one part of the soil, it can actually burn the roots. So flushing the soil with water and kind of alternating those waterings is how I personally like to prevent that. The last thing we want to talk about today is when not to fertilize, which is actually much more important than making sure you fertilize properly for the most part. When you are a new plant parent, typically the instinct whenever you see your plant looking a little sad, maybe a little yellow, is that it must need fertilizer or nutrient, because that makes a lot of sense for humans, but it doesn't actually make a lot of sense for plants, just because typical commercial fertilizer is very, very nutrient dense and concentrated, and actually really easily overwhelm plants if they're not feeling their best. Typically, if a plant is looking sad, it's because of a light issue or a watering issue, and you really want to get a handle on that before you introduce something new like a fertilizer. So again, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but you only want to fertilize when you're seeing new growth. That's when the plant's going to be most able to take in those nutrients. Another thing is that if you have bought your plant within the last year or so, it's typically going to be in a very nutrient-dense potting mix, either from the grower or from a plant shop like Rewild. We use organic, nutrient-dense soils, like I mentioned. Now that we're in the growing season, we even add a little bit of systemic fertilizer. But you can even see, like if you've ever wondered what those little green or blue, or they come in a lot of different colors, like plastic balls are in the soil, that's slow release fertilizer that they use at the greenhouse. Greenhouses in particular, because of production, utilize a lot of fertilizer on their plants. And again, as you're watering it, it's gonna kind of flush through the soil. So you really don't have to fertilize for quite a while after you purchase or repot a new plant. We're gonna wrap this video up just with a few plant fertilizing no-nos. Just trying to, stop some misinformation on the web in our small plant corner over here. So I've seen a lot of plant hacks kind of circulating around that encourage people to add stuff like banana peels or really kind of any food kitchen scrap waste into your potted plants. This isn't necessarily untrue or like a bad thing to do, but the thing to remember is that this is basically composting. So if you're not familiar with composting, or if you've never done composting, I would definitely encourage you to do some research on that before just adding food scraps to your potted plants inside, because you actually can compost food scraps in your home and make compost tea or make legitimate compost, physical compost, and add that to your plants, and that's totally fine. However, when you are just adding food scrap into your potted plants, you have to remember that houseplants are inside your house. So outside, there's a lot of different factors going on that help to break down things like kitchen scraps and make them into something viable that the plant can intake. So there's bugs and worms and the sun. UV is blocked by our windows. There's lots of air circulation. Inside, what ends up happening is your food scrap just kind of sits on the surface of the soil. It can collect mold, it can collect bugs. Ew! And by the time it actually degrades, it's usually done more harm for your plant than good. So I really encourage you to either make like that banana tea, because that's essentially compost tea, or really researching composting and looking into that to make really wonderful compost for your plants out of your food scraps. But please do not put food scraps into your house plants. I have seen people come in with lots of bugs in their soil. And that's just not something that I think you would want in your house. Please don't do it. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us on our first YouTube video. This is new to us, so please leave comments, what you'd like to see more of, and like and subscribe. We'll see you next time. Thanks.